I'm Erin from the Discourse.
And I'm Nick from CCIC.
And you're listening to
Views from Women Deliver.
Hi there, my name is Erin. I'm the CEO and founder of The Discourse, and I'm here today for the second episode of Views from Women Deliver on day 2, just about an hour before the opening keynote. And I just want to start by acknowledging that we're on the unceded Coast Salish lands of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people. And I also just that as Discourse, we actually have made an explicit commitment to reconciliation in our work as journalists, and we always feel that it's important to acknowledge the commitments we made when doing a land acknowledgement. Today we're here to talk about the very important final report that was released today about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. It felt like we couldn't have a conversation about gender equity globally and what's happening at Women Deliver without addressing what's really important in our own country and the hard truths that we need to look at. So I'm delighted for Nick and CCIC to have created space for this conversation, and also for these two guests that we're going to have the privilege of discussing this really important issue with, April and Sheryl. So Nick, I'll just hand it to you for a moment, and then we'll invite you to introduce yourselves.
Well, thank you, Erin. And I think we're really lucky to be here in Vancouver, where we have an opportunity to talk about really what is Women Deliver, what does it mean for us in Canada. And I think nothing is more significant for us right now as a moment in time as a country than reconciliation and learning about what we can do to do better. The report around missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is I think really, really resounding through the country and through the community of people that are here. And I've had an opportunity to be in the conference early this morning, the pre-conferences, and you can hear the buzz and feel the buzz about that. And there was a tremendous procession this morning, leaving from the conference center and coming here to the longhouses. And it really was symbolic and uplifting in terms of all of these young men carrying a young woman, and the need that we all have to lift up all women here. And so that is the connection. That's why we want to talk about this today. And so maybe we could have you both introduce yourselves. So we've got Sheryl Rivers and April Ingham, and I'll just ask you to say a few words about yourself.
Trichman wahat siam ci inaguetal an hat squalo in teat stace. Siam tanat malnedi onas kwashaman sna, Sheryl Rivers queen sna, chenwa hue squotmish oath, chenwa hue Ustlawn Village. Thank you for having me here today. My two ancestral names are Siamtanat and Malnedi, and my English given name is Sheryl Rivers. I come from the Ustlawn Village, or also known as Mission Indian Reserve Number 1, from the Squamish Nation, and it's just straight across the water here.
Well, thank you for being with us. And
Hi.
April.
Yes, I'm April Ingham. I'm the Executive Director of Pacific Peoples Partnership, and I'm just thrilled to be here in your territory with permission. And we're here as part of the Women Deliver satellite event. So we're just really excited to be hosting some community dialogues in a rightful place, the Longhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can you tell us a bit about that? You've set up 4 longhouses here.
Mm-hmm.
So why did you do that, and sort of what's the symbolism of that, in the margins of Women Deliver?
Well, these houses were conceived of in 2017 in the year of Canada's 150th anniversary, and we were marking, that within the community where we are based, which is in Victoria, and we weren't sure how to do that in a good way, knowing that that's not a celebration for Indigenous peoples, and that there's so many different mixed views about 150 and what that means. It's the beginning, it's colonization, it's residential schools, it's so many things to so many people. So we really tried to unpack that by working with the elders and the community members from both Sanghees and the Esquimalt nations. And so we knew we needed to mark that date in a different way, because normally we hold a nice big family friend, festival every September. It's called One Wave Festival. But our event was dramatically reshaped by just being in conversation and with the community about what would be appropriate. So for instance, it went from being a festival to a gathering, and it became about building community and a space for understanding. And we knew that we needed to do something that was a signature, event for that particular year. So the conceptual of the putting longhouses onto the lawn of the BC legislature, what better way to mark 150 than to recolonize the colonizers? So that's what we did. We worked with the most amazing artist, Yalmer Wenstop. He's a New Chalmouth artist, and his vision was for the 4 houses to be up. Our organization works in the South Pacific, so we also wanted to ensure that we had representation of the island families, the Kwakwaka'wakw peoples, the New Chalmouth peoples, and of course the Coast Salish peoples. So we had youth from each of those nations design the house front and paint their graphic along with the artist Yalmer Wenstop. We raised them as a village in 2017 and programmed them as a village and built an amazing community. This is the second time these houses have gone up now. And we're really so pleased to do this. And it wouldn't have happened without the permission of the Squamish Nation and the Musqueam Nation and Tsleil-Waututh Nation. We're very grateful guests in their territories. As an elder in Songhees told us, if you were to raise a longhouse in somebody else's territory without permission, that would be an act of war. So, but to have a longhouse with permission and to know you did the work in a good way, and to host dialogues and cultural exchange, and have this as a central part of the Women Deliver satellite side events is a really spectacular opportunity.
Sheryl, you were just in the longhouse space, and what does it mean to bring people together today for this procession and for the acknowledgement of the report, the final report coming? I know you've had such a role in framing and making it even happen. So can you speak a little bit to that and what this means to you and what the space means to you?
Sure. The Missing and Murdered Inquiry Commission came from, I was past president for the Aboriginal Peoples Commission with the Federal Liberal Party, and back then there was policies that were created. A lot of them were for like clean drinking water and saving the bees, and a lot of policies were brought forward and voted on, first in the small room with the First Nations, Inuit and Métis, and then the missing and murdered, something had to be done immediately was the urgency call that we had placed with the policy. And so it came out as the top policy voted on, and the top 3 policies that were voted on and selected then moved down to the main floor on the big convention floor, and over 5,000 Liberals overall from all over Canada voted on it, and it was unanimous. And at the time, all of us from the Aboriginal Peoples Commission were brought to tears, watching everyone there stand and vote unanimously. It felt like we're finally being heard, and our families are finally going to see justice happen. So when the elections happened, the Liberals won, Justin Trudeau was elected in, and that was the first thing he did, was to bring the commission together and start making it happen and start to follow up on the policy. And I was able to participate with the commissioners when they were here to Vancouver, welcoming them to our territory, but also sharing my story of being a survivor of domestic violence and being able to even be here, to stand here today and to be able to see. It was very heartfelt and emotional to bring my story forward, but it was important, and I felt that it was important to talk about violence against Aboriginal women, not just the missing and murdered Aboriginal women. So when the report came out today, it was even more emotional for me to see the impacts on some of the recommendations when it comes to domestic violence, and it comes to harder sentences for that to take place, as well as murdering your loved one as well. So for me, it's a long process. I'd like to see a lot more done, but I know it's going to take time, and it's going to take all levels of government and all the communities and all Canadians to come together to put action to those recommendations and implement it.
Yeah, and I know on the domestic, some of the recommendations to the criminal code around domestic violence. I mean, this isn't just an Indigenous issue. This is about violence, about domestic violence that impacts all people. Obviously, disproportionately women and disproportionately Indigenous women. But when I read some of these recommendations, it seemed to me that if we adopted them, if we supported them as through our governments and our institutions. So that would just make a better, safer country for everyone. And so I really hope that as a non-Indigenous person that other non-Indigenous people can see it like that as well, and know just how important it is for us to make this happen and find action. So yeah, thank you so much for your role in advancing this work. It's so important.
All of those recommendations, can give a roadmap to moving forward, but it's also very much about signaling some of the things we have to do to change all of our cultures. We think about gender equality, and it's why we're here with Women Deliver, and we think about reconciliation, and this is not an immediate process. It's one that's going to take a long time. Do you think that there's an opportunity here at Women Deliver to give visibility to our domestic priorities in Canada?
I think there is an opportunity. I think our presence here with the longhouses are helping with the impact for that, and bringing the education and awareness out. And we had the Truth and Reconciliation report and the 97 recommendations that came out of that, and they're interwoven with the recommendations that were brought forward today. But these truths need to be heard. We need to be able to tell them, especially in safe spaces. And it's maybe hard to hear the truths, but you have to hear the truths before any reconciliation can take place.
Yeah, and in designing policy or pushing a society forward involves listening. It has to start there. And I think, April, you probably know that very well from your work in the international development sector that I work so closely with, and so do you. And we've learned those lessons across the globe, the importance of designing projects and initiatives from the ground up. And I think we have to be doing that in Canada and better listening, and this is a process for us to get there. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts, April, about sort of how all these discussions around the report, the outcomes, the issues that we have in Canada can sort of relate to our international work and the international stakeholders at Women Deliver?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll just kind of talk maybe just briefly about that ceremony that we witnessed this morning of the canoe being carried by the men and the procession that came from the convention center to here. Now, what was really seriously significant about that was so much more than what you could actually see or just tell by just the experience of seeing it. Because what was happening is that there was a canoe by Isaac Olam, and that canoe was about honoring women, and it was a symbolic canoe created specifically to uphold a young woman, and that young woman was Takaya Blaney, who has been sharing her voice since she was a very young girl internationally about the effects of climate change and the importance of water internationally. And so her brave young voice and her beautiful song and her spirit, and to have her carried by a procession of people that do such amazing work. So for instance, she was carried by Moose Hide Campaign. And Moose Hide Campaign is a campaign.
We're all wearing the...
Yes, we're all wearing our Moose Hide Camp. And what it is that it's men upholding family and children, and what they're doing is creating a national model for all nations. And so where that intersects for me is the fact that, when we're looking at domestic abuse and we're hearing from our partners in the South about how do we tackle these issues. Well, it wouldn't be appropriate for a white woman to come down there and start trying to be in those communities. Our organization works very much from the grassroots up, so we're getting informed by communities, and we know that we're not going to go in and bring something and implant it, and that's going to necessarily work for all peoples. It's not. But what our organization does that's really unique is that we do nation-to-nation sharing, and so if we're able to share a beautiful model like Moose Hide, where men are upholding their families and taking a pledge to also safeguard their communities, that to me is a really appropriate intervention.
It strikes me that in many traditional communities in Canada and internationally, gender equality is a different balance, and sometimes has historically been a better balance, and that we do need to be able to look at what is that historical knowledge and tradition that can actually inform a more equitable space to live in, and certainly it's one of the things I've been hearing from the outcomes of the report is that really, in many respects, the systems that were imported into Canada destroyed a lot of the equality and the status of women that existed in traditional communities. And so sort of going back to those roots, how important that is to give space to the traditional knowledge and structures that in fact we shouldn't be dismissing so easily.
Right.
I think the symbolism of just having these longhouses put up here, and with the canoe with Kaya being carried, this is helping to bring back the roots of our culture and tradition to help balance that gender equality. Yesterday, one of our drummers and speakers here that came to share talked about how women are even ranked higher up than the chiefs because of how close we are when we're life givers and bringing a spirit and a child into this world. That we are, with my culture, we believe that the mother is the closest to the spirits and the spirit world and the creator, because that's where we bring the soul and spirit into the body. So the women are held with such high regard, and to see that balance being brought back, and even being in the longhouses here, sharing and having the dialogues, I feel like I'm going back in time and I'm looking through my ancestors' eyes.
Yeah, I mean, for me today is also about not only creating space and listening, but also making specific commitments as a settler. And in order to create space for that resurgence of equity within these communities and how that can impact the place that we share is so important. And I know there was many 231 recommendations in this report, and I'd love to hear from everyone which ones stood out to you as most important, and also what you feel motivated to contribute to or think that we should be prioritizing. For me, it really is about that storytelling and that culture that you were talking about. As a journalist, there was a number of different calls for justice directed at media, and I think media has played a significant role in projecting narratives and culture that really reinforce some of the negative stereotypes that is at some of the core causes that we're seeing impacting the systemic discrimination in policing and many of these other places. And so I'm looking forward to getting concrete and rolling up my sleeves to say, how can we better support institutionalizing reconciliation in media organizations? How, in my small organization, the power that I do have, can I use that to create space for Indigenous storytellers, for women to share their stories, and to push other media institutions? So that's some of the things that I'm thinking about. What are some of the things that you're thinking about as you read those recommendations, and what you'd really like to see happen, and what you're going to push for with the power that you have?
Well, I know one of the things I'm very excited about is the fact that there's going to be some resources put to this, because it sounds like there's some new funds that have been announced, and I think that that's really exciting, and I think get those funds out, get them to people as soon as we can, and start investing in these women's groups and supporting them. And like part of the work that we do through our organization is really just providing the resources and the support so that people can do the work that they need to do, that they know what to do best in their community. So if we just support them with the resources that they need, they'll tell us. And so we can support. That's the best way we can interact. So that would be one of the ways that I would personally respond. But I would also ensure that those stories are told so that we can make sure that they're addressed once and for all. So.
For me, I think the biggest impact for me out of the recommendations was against domestic violence, because of what happened to me. And when I read that, I actually felt like I was kicked in the stomach, and it brought me right back to what happened. And I want to see change in the justice system, because my ex-husband received 2 years less a day for the brutal assault, and he did try and physically kill me. So to see that, I felt that he had more resources and support as the one who did the offense versus me, the survivor. Although I'm grateful for community and family and everyone that came forward to help protect me. So I want to still move forward as much as I can to implement changes with the justice system. And so that is in relation to what I want to see happen is the police to take this seriously. When families come forward with concerns, to take it seriously. So I think that's where everyone can help as well in pushing that the police need to do something right away and not just dismiss it when a family or someone comes forward with concerns of a loved one that they haven't heard from. Because quite often the outcome isn't a good outcome, but it could have been had they had stepped forward and believed the families and friends right from the beginning. So I want to see justice with the police. I know it's tough for them. I'm grateful they did protect me, and they can't share some of their findings because of some of the cases with the families are in court today, and it would jeopardize the case. So I understand that's why the police couldn't provide a lot of the documents that the commissioners had requested, because it would have impacted the court cases that are current. So for me, it's around justice.
Yeah.
There's so many things we can draw from this report. I think you've pointed out some important ones. I'm struck by how significant the lessons are in so many respects of our interactions in life. The fact that power is everywhere, that we need to be willing to recognize vulnerability where it is, that those that are not, don't feel directly concerned have a role in championing space for and recognition of the needs that are there. Certainly I get a sense that this is hopefully only the beginning of a recognition that can take place in many places. I think that for our international communities that we speak to, we have to be in solidarity with women's movements in Canada. We have to be able to speak to the issues that are here. We have to connect the lessons elsewhere to here, and there's a huge relevance to that. And I certainly think that we've gotten a lot of visibility for this topic today, but it's only for many out there early recognition of all that they need to do and the part they have to play to defend the more vulnerable, to acknowledge their role in maintaining structures that don't recognize those that should be recognized. So even for those who feel that they're not concerned, I think they really are. In the long term, it's about all of us.
I think the power, what I'm hearing from both of you is the importance of trusting communities and trusting families, right? Families know when there is a problem better than police do. Communities know what they need to heal. They need resources and they need structures, and that again is about a shift of power and empowering families. And I think there's really still quite a lot of work to be done, and even on the listening and the truth hearing part of it. I was very interested in the response to the use of the word genocide in this, and of course we need to look at that word in the context not only of Indigenous women and girls that are missing and disappeared, but that in the context of so many other things, from residential school and how that's connected to the 60 Scoop and the child welfare system, and there's many things that have culminated to create the case for genocide, which I believe that's an appropriate word for this, and yet it's a word that many people don't want to say, don't want to name, and Trudeau didn't use those words today in accepting the report. So what does that word mean to you? Does it hold truth, or is what is the nuance that we need to approach that with?
I think that's one of the hard truths, just that word. I believe it is genocide, like you're saying. After my late mom, 10 years residential school, 60 Scoop, seeing so many children apprehended in communities and working with the families, it was, I think it's every man, woman, and child with genocide and trying to eliminate a race, and I believe that that's true to what's been reported today.
It certainly forces reflection, doesn't it? I mean, and we have to be processing it. This word is big, but this topic is big, and we have to recognize what it means for all of us. And I must admit a personal learning in this as a white male in Canada, that I can't just ignore what is going on, that I have a role, that everyone around us has a role to give this the space that it needs for all of us to be able to find the solutions that lift everyone up. I think we've got a lot more learning to do, is really what I get, certainly from my place. And I think calling it genocide is important, because I think that's that's how we can acknowledge what is going
Precisely.
on. And we can't sweep things under the rug. We call things what they are. And we should be calling truth out to those who have an influence to change things around us.
For sure.
Which I think is a really big theme of Women Deliver.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be coming together and speaking out in so many different places. This is a high profile issue that has to have that high profile in Canada for a long time. And it's a topic that's coloring the conference today, as it really should.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister is coming this afternoon and will be here again tomorrow. I certainly hope he'll be making these connections to our international engagements as much as he is to the domestic issues that we need to address.
Well, actually, one of the things when you were talking, I was thinking about, and it's such a challenging topic, and you're talking about genocide. That's so serious and so deep, and just the word even just made me just cringe. And it's just, I lived in the north. I lived on the Alaska Highway. I understand how isolated you can be up there, and I understand also how challenging it can be to get around, and the vulnerability of those women on that highway of tears, and not having the resources to be able to move around, and now we have lost our Greyhound buses. It's like these very practical things, and like we need to address some of those challenges that are facing people. And because those challenges of isolation are still there, and not having those resources and not having the ability to reach out and have people that you can communicate with when you have domestic abuse issues in your own home. Those things need to be addressed. That's why I'm so excited about the resources that are coming. But I mean, that said, that we need to get those resources where they're needed most. And we also need to make sure that we're championing and supporting that within communities. And we're also working with groups that are doing good work, like Moose Hide, and so that we can also make sure that communities are standing together. And
I think that's so important to acknowledge. So much of this issue is complex and intergenerational and cultural, and all of that is going to take so much time and listening and space to address. But some of it is not. Some of it is simple. Some of it's simple as funding a bus route or addressing water, access to clean water. And I just think that the time for tolerance around not having those inequities addressed is over. That's what I read in this on the heels of the TRC report as well. I mean, we should not accept anything less than implementation of the low-hanging fruit here, because there's lots, and then let's recommit ourselves to the more difficult and longer term issues that need to shift.
Canada speaks this big game about gender equality internationally, and we certainly have done a lot in this country. I've been to many countries where there's no comparison, in terms of gender equality within Canada, and yet we have so much more to do. This is really a moment where we can really elevate the topic and recognize that we haven't solved things here at home. Maybe just adding to Lindsay's question, maybe we could talk a little bit of what we'd like to say to our international visitors that are here.
Yeah.
Because there are 9,000 delegates, 7,000 of them are from somewhere else. Just a thought. But
For me, I'd like to welcome the international participants to our traditional territory, to be able to come and witness the beauty, and hopefully they come down and see what it's like from the longhouses here on the water, and how visually to give insight to our history, and to see the inclusiveness of our three nations here that have shared territories. It's so beautiful to see women walking around in all their traditional regalia. As someone who loves wearing my regalia, I think that it's such a beautiful sight, and it feels so strong, and as the word is so powerful, for power, and I feel that that's resonating here. So I just want to say it's great to have all of the strength of the, as I call them, Slawnite Stomp women warriors in our traditional territory.
there are a lot of women warriors here in Vancouver. Yeah.
And if I could just add one more thing, it would be that the connection and the sharing between peoples of diverse cultural backgrounds and different backgrounds, and having that opportunity to learn from each other and to engage together is critical opportunity to learn and to bring good stuff back to our homelands, so that we can share and create safe, healthy communities wherever we live. So we're really excited to be hosting the Women Deliver delegates as well.
Great, thank you. And I would just add also, one of our guests yesterday mentioned Feminist Deliver, which is, of course, a side event of programming that is really about continuing to look at how these issues unfold here in Canada. So I would just invite our audience to also follow that hashtag. And there's been some really interesting conversations even today with Feminist Deliver. So there's just so much happening around the city, not only in that conference area as well, but all sorts of really important and hopefully impactful events and conversations.
Yeah. So thank you all for joining us for Views from Women Deliver, the second edition. The conference is just beginning, and so we're going to be going through some of the topics that we'll be covering over the next few days in the conference and outside in the many events that are happening, not least of which are some government announcements, which we're certainly hoping will be helpful for all of us and our objectives collectively for gender equality. So thank you for joining us, and see you tomorrow.